Hi guys, how y'all doing? I wanted to make this video a little bit sooner, but unfortunately, due to time, I caught brief allergies due to seasonal changes. I'm only going to be settling with putting out one video this week. Unfortunately, this was originally going to be a Drawing Watches video, but unfortunately, I just didn't have time animating it. So what we have here is a slightly vlog-style review-ish of The Book of Life. I saw it last Saturday. It's a very wild, exuberant film with a lot of heart, and to be honest with you, it may as well just be one of the best holiday films to come out this year, for the sheer fact that there really isn't a lot of holiday films in general. And one of many holidays that isn't celebrated a lot, which is the Dias de los Muertos. I did find myself liking this film more than I should have. I mean, it's got problems. I mean, what film doesn't have problems? It's a first-time directorial effort by Jorge Gutierrez, who's worked mostly on television, particularly the show El Tigre, a show that I actually like a lot. On a slight tangent about Jorge Gutierrez, he's actually a very good painter, so I highly recommend if you check out some of his work on Google, like you can just Google Jorge Gutierrez paintings, and you'll see a lot of these great mixtures of pop culture and Mexican illustration, and nice blend, specifically like with his acrylics. He does oils sometimes. I remember like one video on Juxtapose or High Fructose magazine, he did a series of paintings based on Quick Draw McGar, inspired by the Clint Eastwood movies, the Man with No Name series. Surprisingly about this film, let's actually go in and talk about it. The story is based on a fable that takes place on Dias de los Muertos, being told by a tour guide to a bunch of rowdy kids. Actually, when the film got started, I got a little worried. I was like, oh, here we go. We get the kids. There's lame jokes, and I don't know. At that point, I was like, oh, a little sketchy. The animation in particular was looking really nice. I especially loved some of the character designs, even from the get-go. I always loved Jorge and his wife's illustration work, specifically on character design and production design, sort of making everything look like a Mexican version of Fleischer cartoons, where there's a lot of geometric shapes, but there's also these pie eyes. You know, nice homage to the early cartoons. So the tour guide's telling the story about Dias de los Muertos that takes place on the Day of the Dead, and you have a story about two gods, two Mexican gods. One, the god who controls the land of the remembered, whereas when you die and if your family remembers you, you go to this bright and colorful place called the land of the remembered. Or if you are forgotten and there's no one who does remember you in your life, you are brought down to the land of the forgotten. So the two gods, they're kind of like children, they're kind of like people, they're not really like these smart people. They make a wager on these two kids who's going to marry this one girl. They feel like they are great friends and that they'll eventually marry each other. This leads to actually a plot hole in the film when you think about it. How do you know if the girl's going to actually marry one of the two guys? It kind of makes sets the whole film up for failure if you think about that, because what she ends up having her own life and totally forgets about these two other guys. But yeah, regardless, whatever. The two characters are supposed to marry Maria, the character who is set up for this wager by the gods. One is this jockish type character voiced by Channing Tatum named Joaquin. And to be honest with you, I was a little worried because I thought he was going to be this stereotypical jock character, but in all honesty, he was actually kind of, he had character, to say the least. I thought he was just going to be a boring archetype, but there were times where I kind of empathized with him. I was like, well, I could see where you're kind of coming from, and I kind of like that. I kind of like that they didn't just put him in the jock territory. Out of the fact that I think that Channing Tatum plays this character so well, this, you know, dumb idiot who's, you know, muscle-bound idiot, but he's got, you know, semblance of development, that I love that he always plays to those characters. He did it in Magic Mike, he does it in 21 Jump Street, and its sequel, 22 Jump Street, and to be honest with you, he should keep doing that because that's the role he's good at. And then there's the second character, our hero, our sort of Ulysses or Odysseus of the film, Mexican Odysseus, which is the character Manolo. He comes from a line of bullfighters, and he wants to be a musician. He's got a heart of gold, and he wants to marry Maria, or at least he wants to be with Maria because that's his true love. and he wants to go ahead and pursue his life of being a musician despite his whole family not liking it, you know, wanting to be a bullfighter. And he's actually a good bullfighter, to be honest with you. There comes a point in the film when Maria goes away and then comes back home to Mexico, and she has to choose between marrying the two men, because that's how the script goes, based on culture and whatnot. And something I don't like about Maria's character, I'll just get this out of the way, I hate when characters focus on qualities they're not. Like, this whole film is so set up on trying to make her seem like, I'm not a damsel in distress. I can take care of myself. I know kung fu. I know fencing. And yet, she gets captured. She actually almost dies and has to be rescued by somebody. Okay, so you spent all this time focusing your attention on things she's not, and yet she ends up getting captured anyways. That seems kind of like a contradiction there. Again, there comes a point when the wager is put on hold and they find out, like one of the gods finds out, oh no, I might lose this wager and I might not get what I want. He sets up the trap basically that sends Manolo to the underworld, or to the land of the remembered, essentially killing him halfway through the movie, which, to be honest with you, should be taken as like this big dark thing, but because death is taken in this very light manner, it actually seems very appropriate. In essence, actually makes the film a lot like a Greek epic, but with Mexican characters. It's a lot like, I even mentioned it before, he is essentially like our Dante or Odysseus to the Odyssey. And his journey is to basically travel to the underworld and then get out of the underworld and get his love of his life. Surprisingly, I brought up El Tigre. It really comes to no surprise that this episode does have a lot inspired by the episode of El Tigre called The Grave Escape. In this episode of El Tigre, the character, Manny Rivera, has to, he celebrates the Day of the Dead. Something bad happens that sends him to the underworld. He's trapped there, and he has to see his ancestors to go back to the world of the living. And surprisingly, that theme sort of runs in this film as well, which really comes to no surprise because apparently from, you know, most of the behind the scenes features and whatnot shows that this film has been in development, or at least Jorge's wanted to make this film for like 14 years. So chances are he was thinking about making this movie while making that episode of El Tigre in like 2007. So the fact that he got this film made at the very end is very rewarding. I thought it was very rewarding. I thought this film may as well just be one of my favorite animated films this year, right up there with the Lego Movie and with, gotta say, How to Train Your Dragon 2 was pretty good. But I might rank this a little bit higher, just on personal taste, to How to Train Your Dragon and the Box Trolls. And again, I made this sort of promise to myself that I watch every mainstream animated film that come out that gets like wide distribution. So while this is technically considered an indie film, it got a wide release. So technically it puts it as being kind of like mainstream, but still an independent production, which at times kind of surprised me because the production value in this film seemed very much on par with something, you know, DreamWorks or Pixar or Sony Pictures Animation would do. I love the visual style. I love the combination of matte paintings and flash animation when the story requires it. Because sometimes they'll just put in style for the sake of style, but at the same time it just sort of supports the story and supports the themes and the tone of the film. I mentioned that some of the characters are just archetypes. Some of them have development to them. Like, I do like the fact that Manolo is a good hero, and I kind of root for him and I understand his dilemma. And there comes a point in the film, like near in the beginning of the third act, where Manolo has to do something in order to be able to go back to the land of the living, and it's actually very touching. Surprisingly very touching, and it catches me off guard so much by how touching it is. I might even just include an idea of what goes on, because the whole idea is that he's a bullfighter, and yeah, the whole thing seems like he just doesn't want to kill bulls for the sake of, you know, not wanting to do it. But there's a reason to it, and I don't want to spoil as to why he doesn't like doing it, that, you know, it caught me by surprise. And I found it to be very surprising, and this whole theme of acceptance and finding forgiveness in your heart. And also playing with the whole idea of being remembered in death to being forgotten in death. And the fact that they did it in this song, I thought was pretty well done. Also, for the sake of having pop culture references, I hate when movies do that. They just sort of like throw in pop culture references for the sake of. And again, this film uses jukebox musical pieces where they take covers of songs, but they're not like, you know, the Billboard Top 50 songs, or at least most of them are not. These are songs that kind of fit the tone of what's going on in the story, and also help the fact that Manolo is a musician. So in essence, these songs actually fit perfectly to the theme of the film. This film also reminds me that I have a fascination with Mexican culture. Then again, I also always have a fascination with cultures that combine two elements, or like two ideals. Like Mexican culture is a combination of the Aztecs and Roman Catholic religions put together. I mentioned the studio that worked on this. Their first feature film is a film I never actually got to see, which is called Freebirds. I just have no desire to see this movie Freebirds, and everybody tells me that, you know, it's terrible, so I have never found any desire to see that film. So the fact that this is their second film, I think could really establish their identity as a studio. I know previous to this, they didn't do animated films, they did short films that were modeled after the Looney Tunes that looked really well in computer animation. So I'd very much love to see them go with this. The humor in the film is surprisingly, I didn't think it was hit and miss. I just found it to be classic cartoon humor that just works, and great slapstick. I always love slapstick in animation, at least good slapstick in animation. And I thought this film had a lot of good slapstick as far as animation goes. And a couple of good jokes that I personally laughed to, but again, this is subjective opinion. So, not much else to say other than I recommend that you do check out The Book of Life. It may as well just be one of the best holiday films to come out this year. And just some really good animation. I mean, if you love bright colors and good color, good templates, and just a good story with some good characters who might have some cliches to them, I think you won't be disappointed. This actually is one of my favorite animated films to come out this year, depending on how Big Hero 6 turns out. And yeah, go check it out.